Greetings, Pastor Mike, back with this week's View from the Pew. What a strange week it's been. Considerable snowfall here in the heartland. I think we're looking at about 18 inches here on the ground at home, and which seems to be about the most that we got in the metro. So, northwest corner seems to have definitely taken the brunt of the fury over the weekend. Ironically, I was away and out in Virginia, and I actually videotaped this out in Virginia, and unfortunately the file was corrupt, and it was too big to send to the other computer. But I had a great time in Virginia. I had a great room overlooking a lake. Woke up in the morning to see a big buck standing on the opposite side of the lake, about probably 300 feet away. So it's a small lake, but a big buck. Anyway, our reading for today is from Luke 3, verses 7 through 18. John said to the crowds coming out to be baptized by him, "You brood of vipers, who warned you to flee from the coming wrath? Produce fruit in keeping with repentance, and do not say to yourselves, 'We have Abraham as our father.' For I tell you, out of these stones God could raise up children for Abraham. The axe is already at the root of the tree, and every tree that does not produce good fruit will be cut down and thrown into the fire." "What should we do then?" the crowd asked. John answered, "Anyone who has 2 shirts should share them with one who has none, and anyone who has food should do the same." Even the tax collectors came to be baptized. Jesus said, "What should we do?" "Don't collect any more than you're required to," he told them. Then some soldiers asked him, "What should we do?" He replied, "Don't extort money, and don't accuse people falsely. Be content with your pay." The people were waiting expectantly and were all wondering in their hearts if John might possibly be the Messiah. John answered them all, "I baptize you with water, but the one more powerful than I will come, whose straps of his sandals I am not worthy to untie. He will baptize you with the Holy Spirit and fire. His winnowing fork in his hand is clearing the threshing floor and gathering wheat into the barn, but he will burn up the chaff with unquenchable fire." And with many words, John exhorted the people and proclaimed the good news to them. Today's sermon is entitled, "A Donkey in Every Church." Does your church have a donkey? I've been to a few churches with donkeys. I think we all do. A true story comes out of the Old West about a group of Apaches who attacked a cavalry unit. They captured the paymaster's safe. They had never seen a safe before, but they knew it contained gold. They tried to open the safe but were unsuccessful. They beat on it with their tomahawks. Obviously that wasn't going to work. They hooked it up behind the horses, dragged it around the ground a bit. That didn't rough it up too much. They threw it on the fire and heated it up. They even tried to blast it with gunpowder. Finally, they dropped it off a cliff into a ravine. In spite of their best efforts, however, the safe held tight. Finally, they gave up and left it behind. Later, the army found that abandoned safe. The paymaster immediately rushed over to it, turned the combination a few times, and within minutes he had it open. For all practical purposes, the mystery was impenetrable, and until somebody who knew the combination was able to do something with it. 400 years before Christ, the great philosopher Plato, a hugely intelligent man, sought to penetrate the unfathomable mystery of reality. He described the human condition such as this: man is imprisoned in a cave. He is shackled in a world from which he cannot escape. He wears blinders so that his perspective is limited to what is directly in front of him. Before him are only the shadows of real objects. Given these restraints, he's able only to see a small part of reality, to comprehend a tiny fraction of truth. Well, no wonder Plato's name lives on even today. His was a brilliant recognition of the human situation. Shadows in a cave. Plato was a great philosopher, but even the simplest Christian, the newbies, the new believers that we have, they have an advantage over Plato that we could never imagine. The simplest Christian believes and knows that in a dark cave the human condition of God is shown a wondrous light. We know because he has given us that combination. An ancient theologian was named Origen and tried to simplify the message of Advent and Christmas something like this. Suppose there was a statue so large that the eye of a human could not take it all in one look. How best to grasp the essential form and substance of that statue? Would it not be wise to make a copy of parts of that statue and then combine them into a size that we can understand and see? Well, that's exactly what Origen did when he talked about God. God was such a huge statue that we can't fathom it. It takes Jesus Christ coming down in human form, a small form that we can understand and see, to fully grasp the magnitude of the Christmas season. Here then is the first glorious truth about Advent and Christmas. God has come down to our level. When we cannot ascend to God, God came down to us. He wants to be with us. Al Lindgren's a professor at Garrett Evangelical Seminary. Tells about his junior high son and he going fishing one time. It was on one of those days that the fish just wouldn't bite, so the two of them had a lot of time to talk. Out of the blue, his junior high age son then said, "Dad, what is the toughest thing that God's ever had to do?" Al said the question caught him, a minister now, no less, caught him off guard. He didn't know what to say, so like any good teacher, he answered the question with a question. "Son, what do you think it is?" he asked. His son responded, "Even though you're a minister, you don't know much about God, do you?" Well, we've heard that from our kids before, haven't we? The boy then proceeded to answer his own question. "Since taking science in high school, I've been wanting to know the answer to that," said the son. "I thought the creation of the world might be the hardest thing that God's ever tried to do." Sound like a good thought, doesn't it? In Sunday school, we got to talking about some of the miracles, like the resurrection. And I thought perhaps that was the toughest thing that God's ever done. And after thinking some more and talking to others, I decided that no one knows God really well. So now I think that's the toughest thing that God has ever tried to do, to make us understand that who he is and that he loves us. The father could simply say to his son, "Son, I think you're right." That boy fully understood what God came to do. God has come down. God humbled himself on our behalf. We go to our knees sometimes to communicate to God. Can we fathom the idea that God goes to his knees to communicate with us? An interesting article in a national magazine featured a former Alabama football player by the name of John Croyle. A devout Christian, Croyle started a ranch back in 1975 called the Big Oak Boys Ranch. On that ranch, he has taken in over the years hundreds of homeless, unwanted, and abused boys. He says he has seen at least 300 Class A miracles among those boys. At the ranch, those boys are exposed to religion, love, and hard work. Croyle has received a lot of help from other famous football players and such, like the great coach Bear Bryant, John Hanna, the New England Patriots, and Ray Perkins, former coach of the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, have all pitched in on the ranch. Well, John Croyle married his childhood sweetheart, and along with their own 2 children, they live on a small farmhouse at the Big Oak Ranch. The boys say that they know I love them, says Croyle, because I live in a house smaller than they do. That sentence caught my attention. I live in a house smaller than they do. So often, even servants of God nowadays seek to live like royalty. Press reports that a famed radio teacher who built an 8,000 square foot, $2 million home. It'll be interesting to see what kind of a sermon he'll be able to deliver on the subject of missions now, won't it? Joyce Myers, a good friend of mine, came under some scrutiny by Congress with the fact that she had a gold toilet and a private jet. Her listeners heard her message, but the world heard about the toilet. God needs to communicate God's love to us. Maybe a manger, some straw, some sheep, and a shepherd or 2 were just the things that they needed to hear. Maybe the little town of Bethlehem was the only place that this could happen. We mortals would have had the Son of Man born in Rome or in Athens or someplace royal. Or at least Jerusalem, at least people worship there. But not God. A little book from Doubleday is entitled, Dear God, Children's Letters to God. One young man wrote, Dear God, was there anything special about Bethlehem? Or did you just figure it was a good place to start a franchise? That was signed your friend, Jim, age 12. Well, obviously Jim thinks a lot about franchises. Well, obviously God thought it was a great place on earth to start a franchise. God humbled himself, came down to a stable and a manger among cattle and sheep and the shepherds in a tiny town of Bethlehem in order to communicate to us that his love and his purpose were about us. God has come down, and that's the great truth about Advent and Christmas. Here's the second. Humanity has been lifted up. We cannot rise to God, but God's grace. We could be lifted up. There's a humorous story. You've been wanting to know about that donkey, haven't you? Humorous story about a church having an outdoor nativity pageant using live animals. It was quite a feat because the church was located in the heart of a downtown metropolis. The evening pageant was busy. Everybody was busy making preparations, and somehow the donkey just kind of wandered down the street on its own. There was quite a commotion. Finally, he entered a nearby bar. Obviously, one of the customers was quite under the Christmas spirit, so let's put it that way, and decided he'd had enough to drink because he was startled when that donkey came into the bar. The bartender, seeing that the customer was startled, tried to calm him down, saying, "Oh, don't let that donkey bother you. He belongs to the Methodist church up the street." Thinking about that, the man decided it was time to leave and go join a church of his own. Well, there's some donkeys in the Methodist church, the Presbyterian church, the Baptist church, the Catholic church, and yes, I'm afraid to say, even the Lutheran church, both inside and outside. In fact, all of us act like a donkey at one time or another. But when Jesus of Nazareth was born in Bethlehem of Judea, all of the donkeys were raised up to a new level, including you and I. God has come down, and humanity has been lifted up. Remember the famous French author Balzac, yes, if you remember the movie, the Music Man. I almost lost my, almost, almost went out of my head there for a minute. The Music Man, where they talk about Balzac being in the works of Balzac being in the library, and Madame Librarian having to defend that. Marion the Librarian. Anyway, Balzac, fancying himself an expert on interpreting handwriting besides his writing ability, he believed he could determine the character of people by analyzing their script. One day an old woman brought in a little boy's homework book, asked this great author and an expert on handwriting to give an opinion about the child's potential. Balzac studied very carefully the irregular, untidy script and asked, "Are you the boy's mother?" "No," the old woman replied. "Perhaps you're related," he asked. "Not at all," she said. "Then I have to tell you frankly, this youth is slovenly, probably stupid. He will never amount to much." "Ha!" said the woman. "It might surprise you to know that this very notebook is your own when you were a little boy in school." Balzac was caught. A study of humanity's past would be depressing at best. Thousands of years of bloodshed, hate, bigotry, and war point to a future as dismal as our past. Nevertheless, 2,000 years ago, in that little town of Bethlehem, God paid humanity the ultimate compliment. God took on human flesh. God must see something in us that we do not see in ourselves. God has come down, and humanity lifted up. Salvation is drawn near. That was the message that John the Baptist gave in the wilderness. God has come down. Man has been lifted up. Where the horizontal and the vertical intersect, they form the cross of Jesus Christ. We then are the recipients of that great free gift this Christmas. That is why the Christmas is a perfect time to be gift giving. The Church of Virginia has a great tradition that once a year, each member of the church submits a charity or names. It could be, next door neighbors having a troublesome time, a family down the street that can't afford toys for Christmas, or having trouble finding a meal. Anyway, the church writes out checks for $50 in the name of each member of the church. And what a great way to give mission money, isn't it? We are the recipients of the greatest gift of all. God of all creation has come down in the form of a babe in Bethlehem. The babe of Bethlehem became the Lamb of Calvary. And because of that divine drama that took place in the stable of Bethlehem, and that was only a small part of our salvation. And our salvation, because of that, was made possible. It was on our behalf that God humbled himself, and that salvation that he offers is free for all to receive. We are so absurd in our desire to do something grandiose in order to earn our salvation. There's no material gift that we can offer the Christ child in return for what God has done for us. We are like the young man in college who couldn't get home for Christmas, so he sent his dad an inexpensive set of cufflinks and a matching inexpensive tie clasp. Along with the gifts, he sent a note. Dear Dad, this is not much, but it's all that you can afford." Well, you've been to college and you know what Mom and Dad support you a lot of times along the way, and that's what happened with that young man. Each day I opened my devotional to a bookmark that was given to me. It probably cost my daughter 50 cents, but she gave it to me on one of our last Christmases, and it reminds me that I'm her number one dad. It says that on the bookmark. I'm grateful that I'm the only one who gladly applied for that job, because I'm sure the competition for that young lady would be immense because Kelly is truly something special. It is the most cherished present ever. That's my most cherished present, one I look at daily. When we try to offer something material to God or something born out of our own accomplishment, God must smile with appreciation and understanding. But the gift God offers us is totally unconditional. It's free. There's no strings attached. There's only one gift we can offer God in return. That is to receive the gift that God offers us. God has come down. Humanity's been lifted up. Salvation has drawn nigh. All we have to do is receive it joyfully, and make it our own. As the snowplows drive down the street making noise, that's this week's View from the Pew.